Curious George Discovers Space. It's by Craig Miller and Joe Fallon. Copyright 2015. Are you curious about space? George is too. Come along and see what's happening at the Space Center. Professor Wiseman has invited George and his friend, the man with the yellow hat, to the Space Center. Professor Einstein and Professor Pisa needed help to restock at the space station. With food and supplies, they invited the man with the yellow hat to ride a space shuttle up through Earth's atmosphere into space. He would enter orbit and pass near the space station to make his delivery. The man will get his experiences weightlessness. How would you like to float inside a space station? Of course, George was disappointed he wouldn't be able to come along. But in order for the man to release the supplies, he needed to be able to push 4 buttons at the same time. The man only had 2 hands. He couldn't do that, but a monkey could. George was thrilled to help. The hungry scientists on the space station would soon have more food to eat. George would also deliver some new supplies to help them with science experiment. You must launch the payload at exactly the right moment, Professor Einstein said to George. George nodded. He would have to listen to instructions carefully. Do you think that would be hard for one little monkey? Liftoff was a success, but then George wanted to look at the supplies. He took some of them out to play, but he couldn't get them back inside quickly enough. George missed the payload launch. He passed by the space station without sending the supplies. George would have to orbit Earth one more time. George, you have enough fuel for only one orbit. You have to get the supplies back in their containers. The next time you pass the station, you will be the last chance. Then we have to bring you home, warned Professor Wiseman. George was used to cleaning his room. It was good practice for cleaning up the mess in the spaceship. He was ready to launch the supplies. Hooray, we made it to the space station. George had one more task to complete. He had to make it back to the ground safely. To do this, the shuttle had to retain the Earth's atmosphere at the right moment. It was a good thing George listened to instructions this time. He pulled out to control the ship's direction. He could now land the ship back at the Space Center. His friends congratulated him on a successful mission. On to the next problem, said Professor Pisa. Once the shuttle mission was over, we are having trouble with our Mars rover. The controls are getting stuck here at the Space Center. We are worried that when we actually land on Mars, it will also get stuck on the rocks, added Professor Einstein. At Mars rover is a vehicle specially made for exploring the red planet and sending information back to Earth, the man explained. They're testing the new rover here at the Space Center. George was excited to see the launch of the latest Mars rover. He hoped they could figure out this problem together. They sat around the table to talk and plan. The man asked. Since Mars has lower gravity than Earth, it is possible the problem wouldn't even happen there. Professor Pisa agreed. It's certainly possible if the pull of Earth's gravity is causing the sticking. It might not stick in Mars' low gravity. With the low gravity on Mars, you could lift 3 times more there, said Professor Wiseman. If the rover sticks, maybe we can get it going again by giving it a push. George imagined how strong he would be on Mars. With all the people talking, George fell asleep. He dreamed he was going to be the first monkey headed to Mars. In his dream, Professor Wiseman told him, "It was an important mission, George. If the rover sticks, your job is to give it a good push." The man was going on the space mission with George. How lucky. When the ship finally landed on Mars, George was sitting on the top of the Mars rover. When it was released, he went with it. The rover bounced along the surface on the red planet. George was on the runaway vehicle. Luckily for George, he found a remote that controlled the rover. He was able to slow down the rover. Phew! He also had a book about a Mars terrain. Now he could explore Mars. George rode up to a very deep wildlife valley that looked like the Grand Canyon, only much longer. The book told him it was called the Valley's Many Trees. George also found the Montes Mons, the highest volcano in our solar system. It had a great view. He wished his friend could enjoy it too. At least George could see where his rocket had landed. He began to drive the rover back toward the spaceship. Do you think the Mars rover was able to launch after all? After the control panel has been cleaned, of course, it is a good thing monkeys are dreamers, the man said. He agreed he had many dreams as big as the one about traveling to Mars. The end.